I've been noticing recently that I've got some kind of funny electrical problems going on. The dash lights and my headlights have been pulsing just a little bit, and I've noticed that when I use the power windows, the glass has been a little bit slower than normal going up and down. And then recently I started noticing some really severe issues. When I was driving a couple days ago, at first I thought the transmission had gone out because it seemed like the vehicle had gone into neutral. The engine speed just went way up, but the vehicle wasn't moving. I hit the gas pedal in from a stoplight, and I think the RPMs revved up to 3,500 or 4,000 and really didn't move. And then all of a sudden the transmission seemed to engage, but the vehicle was very sluggish, didn't have any power at all. Then some of the gauges on the cluster kind of bounced back and forth. The odometer, the digital odometer, flashed off. So at that point I knew I had some sort of an electrical problem, and I suspected it was the alternator. I've read in the past that the alternator going out, or a wiring problem between the alternator and the vehicle or the battery, can cause all sorts of issues like that. So I'm about to troubleshoot the problem. What I would like to do to eliminate or try to narrow down the possibilities is I'm going to start the vehicle, let it run for a second, and then I'm going to disconnect the positive battery cable. And in doing so, I should eliminate the battery from the equation. Once the vehicle's started, the engine really should only be running off of alternator power. The alternator should just be charging the battery at that point. The battery should not be supplying any voltage for the electrical system to operate. If the engine keeps running, then I need to troubleshoot the battery itself or dig a little bit deeper. If the engine shuts off, then I know the issue is either the alternator itself, or it could be the voltage regulator, which is, I think, part of the alternator, or it could be the wiring between the alternator and the battery or the vehicle. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start the engine, and then we'll remove the positive cable and see what happens. Okay, as you can hear, the engine's now running, and I'm going to go ahead and remove the positive battery cable. I've already loosened the connector, so all I got to do is just pull it off, and we'll see what happens. You can see before I even got it off the terminal, the engine shut off. So that tells me my issue is somewhere probably between the alternator and the battery, or the alternator itself. So I'm going to do a little bit more troubleshooting and see if I can figure out what that problem is. Okay, as you can see, I have removed the battery from the vehicle just to give myself some more clearance here to troubleshoot. And I'm going to start by tracing the positive battery cable back to the alternator. So you can see, here's the positive cable, obviously. One section goes to the fuse box here, but I want to follow this larger branch that comes along the side here, beside the battery tray, runs up just alongside the radiator here and goes under the battery tray. And then here it branches off. One section goes under the radiator. We want to follow this other branch that doubles back and runs along the frame rail there. You can see it right there where I'm pointing. If you follow that, that's actually what goes and connects to the alternator right there. Come on, camera. There we go. Hopefully you can see where I'm pointing. That's the terminal that right here that we just were looking at from the front. This is that same wire harness, and it should connect right there to that terminal. But as you can see, mine has corroded and is completely disconnected. So I had no current at all from the alternator to the battery. So I was running strictly on battery power all the time. And so I'm assuming that the stuff I experienced the other day was strictly due to my battery getting weak and just not having the voltage, or being able to supply the voltage and or current that the ignition system needed and it was just causing all kinds of electrical gremlins. So clearly I need to start by repairing that. I'm hoping my alternator is actually still fine and I don't have to replace it. So anyway, hopefully this gives you some good tips on how to troubleshoot a similar issue with your ignition system. If you find that if you do the test with the positive cable, and you remove it with the engine running, and you find that the vehicle shuts off like mine did, and then you trace this cable and it seems to be intact, then it's likely that your issue is the alternator itself and it would need replacing. I'm going to replace this cable and see if that solves the problem, and if so, then I'm not going to have to replace the alternator. If I do end up replacing the alternator, then I'll probably film that as well, and we'll post a video. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can troubleshoot this. It looks like I'm probably going to have to splice on a new piece of wire there and a new terminal, and hopefully I can get that. There should be a hex nut on the end of that stud on the back of the alternator that I can remove and land that wire back on there. So let me see if I can figure that out. Looks like I'm going to have to probably undo some retaining clips. Let's see, down here there's one right there that holds that harness, another one over to the side. If I get those loose, hopefully I can peel back the slack, although it looks like I'm also going to have to remove this connector here from the alternator, which I think there's a squeeze tab on or something. I'll have to figure that out as well, because that's all part of the same harness, so I'm not going to be able to pull any slack back unless I remove that. So let's see if I can get that harness pulled out of here, and we'll inspect the end of it and see how we can repair it. Okay, for the life of me, I cannot seem to get these two retaining clips unhooked from the harness, so I'm just going to have to work everything from the underside. So if you crawl on the passenger side, here's the tire. If you look up here by the frame rail, there's this little kind of foam skirt that keeps road debris from getting up into the engine compartment. If you peel that back, you can access the harness here. So I've just pulled it back through this opening. You can see this is that connector that I was showing you on the bottom of the alternator, and you remove that by squeezing this tab on top. Once you squeezed it in, pull down, and it'll pull off the alternator. And here is the end of the wire that had snapped off. So you can see the connector itself just corroded all the way through. So the ring on this ring terminal is probably still bolted to the alternator stud. So I think what I'm going to need to do is clip it back here. There's actually I realize there's a bad spot in the insulation right there, so I'm going to cut it back just a little bit. I'll have to cut the insulation back further to expose some of the wire. Then I'm going to have to get a butt splice connector and some heat shrink tubing, so I can put a connector in here and then add a section of wire with a new ring terminal on the end to give myself enough slack. I don't think I have that stuff on hand, so I'm going to have to go to the parts store and find it, and I'll be right back. Okay, you can see that I have trimmed the corroded end off the wire, and I've cut back the insulation to expose some of the copper, and I'm ready to put a connector on here. I was hoping to put a crimp butt connector so I could just add a piece of wire, crimp the two ends, and I put a piece of heat shrink tubing over it, and that would give me a nice snug connection. Unfortunately, my local parts store did not have any butt connectors in this wire gauge. The only thing they had was like number 10 or bigger. This appears to be like a number 4 or number 6 wire. So what I'm going to have to do, I think, is put a ring terminal on the end like this, and then put a bolt through here. And I bought this little short section of it's like a battery cable, and I'll have to bolt these two together like so. by putting a bolt and a nut through there, and then I'll put some heat shrink tubing over that whole connection, and then I'll connect the other end to the alternator. So I'm going to go ahead and crimp this guy on there and then get the bolt and nut ready to connect to my new wire. Be right back. Okay, you can see I've got my connection made up. I've got the new connector spliced on. I've got a little 1/4 bolt and nut threaded through the two connectors to butt them together. Again, this is not what I was hoping to do, but it's going to work. So now I just need to slip some heat shrink tubing over this and heat it up with my heat gun until it snugs up, and then we can work on connecting the other end to the alternator. So let me get this wrapped up on the underside and we'll move back to the alternator. Okay, you can see I've got the heat shrink tubing installed, and we're ready to connect the other end to the alternator. Unfortunately, I discovered that I am actually going to have to replace my alternator, simply because just now when I went to remove the nut from the stud on the back of the alternator down there, see if I can point to it here, right there. When I went to remove the nut there so I could connect my new wire, the nut was seized to the stud and the stud snapped off. So now I've got nothing to land my wire on. So I'm not sure if that's a replaceable part or not, but regardless, I'm going to have to take the alternator out to get to it, and since I've already purchased an alternator just in case, I'm just going to go ahead and replace it. So anyway, that kind of concludes this troubleshooting video. I will post a link to another video that I will now create to show how to replace the alternator. So anyway, I hope this short one has been helpful as far as tracing the problem, and I'm going to get to the replacement now. Thanks for watching.